Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Talk Junkies, where tonight's going to be a very interesting night, as it is each and every single week here at Talk Junkies. It's been a couple weeks since I've done a podcast, maybe even a month or so. On YouTube, it's been probably 3 months, but on Spotify, iTunes, and all those, it's been a couple weeks. I had Pat Holland on with the Missouri Freedom Initiative. We talk about, in that episode, we talked about just the importance of local politics and the corruption within local politics, and you'd be surprised at the local politicians in your local areas on how corrupt that they could be. Some say that they're a Republican when they're really a Democrat, and just some stuff like that. So if you're interested in that type of content, check out that last podcast on Spotify and iTunes that I did with Pat Holland with the Missouri Freedom Initiative. Pat, I love you, man. It's always good. It's always good to have you on. Tonight's going to be a very interesting night. I've actually teamed up with RedPill Media, and this is the first podcast that I'm going to be doing with them. And I'm very excited. They reached out to me a couple years ago. I'd reached out to Edward Griffin, who wrote the book Jekyll Island, Exposing the Federal Reserve. And I tried to get him on my show, but it just never worked out. And actually their media team hit me up and said, hey, we'd love to have you join RedPill Media. And here I am. They're bringing on their first guest today. And this guy is very decorated, and he's helping a lot of people. He's an author. He's the creator of the Root Cause Protocol, also known as Magnesium Man. And I'm gonna change that to Copper Cowboy, if you don't mind. He is one of the
I love it.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah. He's one of the foremost experts on magnesium's role in the body. In the delicate dance, magnesium plays with iron, copper, and calcium. And I'll let him get into his credentials. Morley Robbins, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining.
Doing great. Thanks for the opportunity, and looking forward to our repartee tonight. It'd be a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. And again, thanks to RedPill Media for making this happen, because without them, this most likely wouldn't have happened. I got a chance to listen to a little bit of your content today, man. And just how I started off is just tell me about your journey, man. Just like how you got to where you are today, and kind of what your journey is on Earth.
Well, I was born into a very sickly family. My mom was an alcoholic. My dad was manic depressive with schizophrenic tendencies. And you go into that kind of environment, you're going to have all sorts of flux. Well, my sister, and I should point out, I just saw the biographical movie about J.D. Vance, and I'm really glad I did. It's a fantastic movie, but I now realize that my life was a joke compared to his. So it's like we all have our cross to bear. But at the time, it was a pretty challenging childhood growing up in that situation. And my sister decided to become a nurse. So I was supposed to become a doctor. That was sort of the New World Order. And when I got to college, I realized how much work it was. It's like, oh man, this is not going to happen. And I still applied to medical school, got rejected by 18 schools, 12 in one day. That's a trip to go through. And if you don't go to medical school, you go to business school to boss them around. And that's what I did. I became I was never the top dog in a hospital, but I was always in charge of planning and marketing, reporting to the CEO, and did that for 12 years. And I was really good at helping them become bigger and badder and better. And then I decided to go uptown and become a consultant, and traveled the countryside for 20 years, um, solving all sorts of complicated problems. And it was a very heady experience. It was a very profitable experience, but it was also very stressful. And for 20 years, when you're pulling a suitcase behind your back, it does take a toll on your body. Well, I developed frozen shoulder, and I couldn't pick my hand up above my waist. And that got me to a health food store, and they were recommending that I go see a chiropractor. And I said, hey, I don't do witchcraft. I mean, just give me some supplements, and I'll be on my way. Well, there was no improvement. After months of doing this, I couldn't sleep. I was in so much pain. So I went back to the health food store, and they said, Morley, we love you. Go see Dr. Liz. Well, long story short, Dr. Liz is now my wife, and she woke me up to my mission. She cured my frozen shoulder in 2 sessions, and in the very first conversation we had, she used a phrase that I had never used or never heard, in 32 years of working in hospitals. She talked about the innate healer. And I looked at her, I didn't say anything at the time. And I thought, if there's an innate healer, I want to find out who that is. I really want to dig into that. And I started researching 15 years ago, 2 to 3 hours a day, 7 days a week, peering into uh, it, taking deep dives into the peer-reviewed literature, reading stacks of books like you've got, trying to understand how does the body tick. And long story short, the book that I wrote, Cure Your Fatigue, is my perception of what runs the body. And it's bioavailable copper. And most people flinch when they hear the word copper. I love that new nickname, Copper Cowboy. I'm going to play around with that. That's got a lot of cachet to it. But the meme that runs medicine on the planet is that we're anemic and we're copper toxic. And we're being trained like circus bears to believe that we're anemic and copper toxic. And so people think nothing about taking more iron and they shun copper. And what people don't know, and what we'll, I'm sure, have a chance to chat about, is that because there's no or very limited copper in our diet now, people have become iron toxic, toxic to the core, and it's causing accelerated aging, it's causing cancer, it's the dynamic that was behind COVID, but most people don't know that. And it was about April of 2020 when I renamed COVID. COV stands for coppers vanished, and ID stands for irons dysregulated. And what most people don't know is research that was done in two separate universities about the same time, March of 1928 at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, May of 1928 at the University of Kentucky, and they withheld copper from the diet of rodents. They wanted to see what's going to happen. What's the metabolic response to no copper in the diet? And what they discovered is that iron accumulated at a massive level in the liver of the animals. And what people need to understand is that our liver, it's over here on the right side, underneath the right rib cage, that's the battery that runs the body. Just like we drive a car that has a battery, right? Take the battery out and the car doesn't run, right? So you fill the liver full of iron, it can't hold energy. It can't store energy. And who knew? And so this has been a quest to get behind the covers of what's really causing people to be so ill. And it's just a phenomenal journey over the last 15 years.
So you would, and I just want to rewind. There's a lot to unpack within just that statement itself. And for me, I kind of like to rewind it back. And you were in the medical industry for such a long time, and just the things that you had to have seen and how they run the business. And because at the end of the day, it is a business. They do save lives, and they have created medicines that save people's lives and stuff like that. But it doesn't take away the fact that they've been ignoring. They've been ignoring what your book is about. And I'm sure that, like you said, there are peer-reviewed articles about research that's been done on copper, magnesium, and iron. But I guess my question is, you give credit to your wife for opening your eyes to that?
Absolutely.
And
just read the dedication to the book. It's right there. So she woke me up. That was her job.
So and that's awesome. And cheers to your wife, man. If I had a beer, I'd cheers her. But I guess my question is, why didn't you see it before? Or were you not looking for it?
Out of sight, out of mind. No, it's I worked almost exclusively with physicians who have an MD degree. Well, a lot of people think that stands for medical doctor. And what I've come to realize is it stands for mineral denialist. They're not taught about minerals in medical school. And if they do know about minerals, they think of them as hood ornaments on a car, when in fact they're the engine that runs the car. And so there's a real misunderstanding about what are the mechanisms to create energy, what are the mechanisms to stay in balance, what are the mechanisms to respond to infection, what have you. And minerals are vitally important. Microbes, very, very important as well. But the microbes don't work without the minerals.
So real quick,
And so,
sorry, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go
That's
ahead.
very
That's
important.
right.
And not that maybe this doesn't even matter, but why is the medical industry that way? Why are they mineral deniers? I'm just curious if there is even an answer. Obviously, I'm sure it's money driven, or it's they want to
There's
keep people sick, so they keep going to the hospital type of thing.
there's no money in healthy humans, period.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And the important part of this whole conversation is that when we're under stress, do you know anybody under stress,
Oh,
Paul?
I've been under stress.
I'm just thinking of your day today with your three kids.
Yeah.
So when we're under stress, when there's stress in our world, there's oxidative stress in our body. And it's an obligate response of the body to we live on a planet with oxygen, right? It's 21% of the air we breathe is oxygen. It's not our friend. It's actually a poison. And the only reason why we're able to exist on this planet is because copper is the only element that can turn oxygen into water to release energy so we can go about our day. And it's absolutely amazing. It's happening inside all 40 quadrillion of our mitochondria. And that's not taught in doctor school. They don't know about minerals. They don't know about nutrition. The the graduating class of UNC medical school in 2020, how many days of nutrition training do you think they got in their 4 years of training?
0.
35 minutes.
Pretty close.
35 minutes of it. You can't even distinguish between apples and oranges and meat in 35 minutes. Much less get into the subtleties of mineral metabolism. And that's the Achilles heel of medicine, is that I contend that doctors don't know how blood is made. They don't know how bone is made. They don't know how energy is made, and they don't know how hormones signal with each other. I do. Do you know why I know this? Because it requires copper. Every one of those four mechanisms that are the foundation of our physiology require bioavailable copper, and that's not taught to doctors. It's amazing, absolutely amazing.
No, yeah, it is. And so whenever you first found this out, I'm sure it took a lot of, just like you said, you started reading through articles, thousands. I think you said right around 10,000 articles is what you ended up
Right,
looking at. I'm sure that's give or take right around in that area.
right.
Um, and you credit your wife to opening your eyes to this type of like information, or the holistic side of what it is to be a human being. What turned you on to magnesium specifically, or who did? Was it just reading
Yeah.
specifically?
No,
Because
it's a
like,
great question.
and sorry, before I get into that, I guess whenever I heard about magnesium, it wasn't even to the level that you're even describing. It was like, hey, put this magnesium on your foot, spray it on your foot, and it'll help with, or on your aching bones and stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
like to the extent that I know.
So I quit my work as a hospital dweeb. I stopped being a consultant. I stopped being an executive, and I actually became um, Dr. Liz's girl Friday. I was checking people in and out, and I said, "Do you mind if I read while I'm working here?" She said, "No, I don't mind at all." And so I was reading a lot, learning a lot, and one of Dr. Liz's clients was a psychologist, and she said, "You know, Morley, I can't help but think it would be really good for you to write some articles about what you're learning." She said, "But I would encourage you um, to use paradoxical intent." I went, "What? What are you talking?" She said, "Reverse psychology." So I wrote a whole series of articles about let's get fat. Let's break bones. Let's make a heart attack. Let's go on the offense. And what I did was there were 10-step plans to learn how to get fat, learn how to break a bone. And when I did the one on let's make a heart attack, 7 of the 10 steps came from the American Heart Association, that they're advising people to do such and such to avoid a heart attack. And I could prove in the literature it was just the opposite. And so I wrote this article, and people loved it. They thought it was very clever. And I shared it with another client, and she read it. She said, "This is very, very humorous. You really captured the essence of it." She said, "But I can't help but think that step number 8 isn't more important than you realized." And that was eliminate magnesium from your diet. And I thought, yeah, maybe I'll look into that. So I bought Carolyn Dean's book, The Magnesium Miracle. Well, Paul, it was like reading a murder mystery. Suddenly I realized why everyone in the hospital was so sick, because they didn't have any magnesium, because they were totally stressed out. And the first nutrients to leave the body when we're under stress is magnesium and the B vitamins. They're water soluble, and they go right into the toilet. And I really took a deep dive into what is stress. There's thousands of different forms of stress. Your day today was stressful. We know that. I remember those days. I had 4 kids. I remember those exciting, stimulating days. And my kids are now in their 30s, and so there's hope. You're going to be fine. You're going to recover. But the thing is, I really glommed on to magnesium and was convinced that the solution was just take more magnesium. And a couple of years into the process, a practitioner, functional practitioner, said, "Morley, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out." And in my arrogance, I said, "Well, you apparently don't understand it the way I do." Well, he was right. I was wrong. I was totally lost in that world of magnesium. And I just kept digging. And I dig to discover that, oh, this oxygen thing is a stressor. Oh, this iron thing is interacting with oxygen, and it creates what's called oxidative stress. And it was about 5 years into the journey. And then I suddenly found out why iron and oxygen aren't playing nice with each other, because there isn't enough copper in our diet. And copper is the only element on planet Earth that can regulate both iron and oxygen at the same time and not create static. And for those who really are intrigued by, so how did all this get started? Turn back the clock to several billion years ago, where there was no oxygen on the planet, so they say. And I'm not trying to offend anyone about, what was the segment of time. We don't know what a year was. Let's just agree with the astrobiologist. It was a long time ago. And when what actually caused oxygen to form on the planet were cyanobacteria. Those are blue bacteria. They were in the primordial sea, and they started to engage in photosynthesis with the sun. And this went on for a while. And prior to those bacteria, there was no oxygen on the planet. And the oxygen went into the seabed, and then eventually it started to creep into the atmosphere. When there was 1/10 of 1% oxygen in the air, it wiped out 99% of life on the planet because it was anaerobic. And what saved life on planet Earth was the metal copper. And 3 elements emerged out of that whole experience. It's called the Great Oxygen Event. People can look it up. It's absolutely spellbinding about the origin of the planet. And There were three chemicals that really came to our rescue. One is called multi-copper oxidases. And it sounds complicated, but what they do is these enzymes turn oxygen, O2, into two molecules of water, 2H2O. And when they do that inside our mitochondria, we can get access to energy. So MCOs were the first. Another chemical, critical chemical that people have heard of, it's called melatonin. Well, melatonin is not just a sleep aid. Melatonin is actually an antioxidant that's made inside all of our mitochondria. So it's a very, very important chemical. And then the third element that emerged back in this beginning times is something called cholesterol. You've heard of it, right? Well, it turns out that it takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make one molecule of cholesterol. So what is cholesterol? It's an oxygen sink. When does cholesterol rise in the human body? When there's not enough copper and there's too much iron. And so these really critically important chemicals that run our body all have their origin back to copper. And there's a very, very important protein that people have never heard of, and it's called ceruloplasmin, and it means sky blue in the blood. And what for those gearheads that really want to learn more about the copper, you're going to find that anything that's blue inside our body has to do with copper. And it's absolutely fascinating. And this protein, ceruloplasmin, has 8 copper atoms inside it. It's the only protein like that in the body. There's no other protein that has that kind of metallation. And there are 6 what are called plastocyanin centers, and these are derivatives of those cyanobacteria that started this whole process billions of years ago. So that's a lot of who struck John, but the fact of the matter is we would not be on this planet, we would not be engaged in this conversation if copper hadn't come to our rescue to enable the emergence of higher life forms, because higher life forms require more energy. And that's what allows us to have these types of spirited conversations.
So in the peer reviewed research that you've read and all these articles that you were digging into, eventually at some point I'm sure you found out about copper, and that's kind of like whenever it led you onto your path. But how many other people were put on to knowing all this information that you know, and how long have they known, and why has this been hidden from the public? And maybe it hasn't been hidden; it's just not talked about. And I'm just curious why it hasn't. If you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think let's just leave it at we don't need to get into conspiracy.
Sure.
Let's just leave it that the economics is such that if more people had access to more copper, there'd be more healthy people.
So
It just doesn't drive the business model.
For sure. I guess, but and I don't want to get into conspiracy either, but there's been other people who have been like intrigued by copper. And
sure.
And they're like the peer reviewed articles and stuff like that have been like talked about on it in these types of things.
There may be a few hundred scientists in the world who study copper. It's not like we're not talking thousands or tens of thousands. It's just a few hundred.
That's wild.
I've had the pleasure of talking to a half dozen of them. They're fascinating people, but this is a very countercultural, counterintuitive field of study, because what you'll discover as you get into the more subtle aspects of copper metabolism is undeniably the most important part of our body in terms of its the amount that we have in our body is 100 milligrams. Well, what's that? 100 milligrams will fit on the top of the head of a 1-inch stick pin. It's a very tiny amount. In contrast, we have 5,000 milligrams of iron in our body. So there's a 50-to-1 ratio of copper to iron. But what people need to understand is that copper is the general and iron is the foot soldier. You don't have to be in the military to know that generals are more important than foot soldiers. And the part that has been kept under wraps, kept behind a curtain, if you will, is that copper is really running the show, but iron is getting all of the credit. And it's just, I didn't know this. When the whole 32 years I was working in hospitals, I never heard people talk about minerals, much less talk about the relationship of minerals, much less the fact that there are only a few that we need to really worry about. And that's really what the book is about. You know, it's magnesium, it's copper, it's iron, and this protein. And once you really get those under control, under regulation, everything seems to fall into place. It's absolutely amazing.
So
And
when do
I didn't
people
know that.
when do
Yeah, go
people
ahead.
when do people start to like within your own study and findings, how much of a role does it play in like the development of children in becoming an adult? Because just kind of what I'm hearing you say is like we are starting to see a lot of problems with kids, right? Whether it's autoimmune disease, and we don't have to go down that road. I'm not saying that's a copper deficiency. Maybe it is. I have no idea. But it seems like metabolic is more like nutrition, what you're consuming and putting in your body. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I guess my question is, how much of a role does it play in children as well?
It's insanely important, but it's not focused on in terms of conventional obstetrics. So, what's a very important process um, in order for a couple to conceive and start a child, there needs to be adequate copper to overcome the oxidative stress that exists in the womb. It's the inherent nature of that tissue. And so the as soon as there is conception, the woman's body starts to make a placenta. It's very, very important. And what people don't realize is that the fetus, from the very beginning, it's really a parasite. And for 9 months, that parasite is growing inside the mother's womb. And it doesn't become a mammal until it comes outside of the womb. It's a fascinating area of discovery. But the thing is, in the third trimester of the pregnancy, and this is true for all mammals, there's an enormous download of copper from the mother's body to the fetus's liver. And to put it in proper perspective, you and I, as adults, have a liver that has about 7 milligrams of copper. It's not very much, but it's what we need in order to have adequate physiological response. But assuming we were born to healthy moms, we were born with 70 milligrams of copper in our liver. So it's a tenfold increase that takes place. Again, it's all mammals. Download this copper. Why? Because the mammal's going to need it on the outside. You got to have that copper in order to interact with oxygen. And as the baby develops, the copper gets distributed throughout the body. And it gets to the brain, it gets to the heart, gets to the organs. And there is meticulous research about this, but it's not taught. And so what rules conventional obstetrics is to focus on iron and vitamin D. There's an obsession. I'm sure your wife, as she was preparing for each of your three children's arrival, she was very preoccupied, or I know her practitioner was preoccupied with iron and vitamin D. And the truth of the matter is, if you want to have a healthy baby, you want to have a fully functioning, developing, switched on kid, you better be focusing on magnesium and copper and retinol, which is the exact opposite of vitamin D and iron. And that's the world we live in. Everything is upside down and backwards. And so the nutrients that are the most important for the healthiest babies are completely ignored by mainstream medicine.
That's insane. That's crazy. It,
And I think it is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just basic, and this is coming down to a scientific level. Which, if you talk to anyone in this type of conversation that has any significance, that's what we make our information on, and facts and knowledge is the scientific method. And it
Right.
should be unbiased, and the research should speak for itself. The peer-reviewed articles should speak for themselves, and the things that are actually happening inside the body, which with what you're describing, and if there's a ton of research that suggests that this is happening and it actually is happening, that's what we should go off of. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Absolutely. And I think what we're witnessing on the planet right now is it's a very tumultuous time. We can all agree on that. But I think there is an awakening. People are energetically, there's a shift that's occurring. And I'm not smoking dope. It's just you can witness it, you can experience it. And I think people are becoming much more open to the idea that there's more to the story. There's been a narrative that has ruled the planet for a long time. I think that narrative is giving way. And now it's time, just like the whole concept of the Fed, right? You know, that's giving way to a whole nother understanding about how an economy can run. I think we're going to witness that in medicine as well. That the whole concept of using chemistry to try to stimulate balance in the body is giving way to an explosion of understanding about how energy is in fact made in the body, how energy is restored and regulated in the body. And when you pull the curtain back on energy production, you better have copper because it's right in the center of it. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of mitochondria throughout our body. And in 2004 and 2006, a very enterprising scientist named Paul Cobain discovered that there's 50,000 atoms of copper at the center of every mitochondrial matrix. It's a little pool at the center of that organelle, and that became a life-changing discovery that I think is going to shift the whole understanding of what the mitochondria are, why they're so important, and why copper is so important to their function.
Absolutely. This is wild stuff, man. Like, there's a lot of questions I have, and again, I know we don't want to get into conspiracy. I'm not trying to at all, but it almost just makes me wonder, because like for me, like I'm 35 years old, and I didn't really start truly caring about my health until I'm in my 30s. Like in your 20s, you feel invincible, and maybe that's because you have this balance of these three things that you're describing at a harmonic level. You know what I'm saying? And does it start dropping off when you get into your 30s and as you get older? And then you start saying, hey, I start to feel these things in my body. What's going on? And then you're like, shit, all this bad stuff I've been doing, I'm done doing those bad things. And then you start looking for this information. So it makes you wonder why they would kind of hide it in a sense. And then when people do seek it, it's like, man, I'm glad I found RedPill Media.
Okay. And so a lot of people, when they reach their 40th birthday, discover they need glasses. And it's like you hit a brick wall. You gotta get glasses. but people aren't told why. Well, the reason why is that's about the age when we crisscross between the dynamic of copper and iron. Iron starts to accumulate a lot faster in the body after the age of 40. Where does it start? In the eye. And the whole the musculature of the eye gets influenced by that iron. And the importance of copper, the importance of energy, the importance of antioxidant enzymes just in the eye alone is profound, but it's not taught that way. And again, there's a lot of hocus pocus in medicine, as you probably know. And what I've discovered, much to my surprise, is that it really isn't that complicated. The body has a beautiful design to it, and there really is a blueprint to run the body, but that blueprint runs on energy, and you got to have copper to make the energy to run the blueprint. And that's kind of the gist of my message when I'll be talking in November, is getting people to wake up to the reality that copper is the the missing piece of the puzzle that people just don't know about.
So okay, so I always like to bring it back to not ancient times, but times of the past, and I'm to the belief that in ancient civilization, if you go back to Egypt or whatever it was, and I know that the podcast you did with Paul Salandino, you had that triangle behind you, and
Yeah,
I always try and
yeah,
bring it back, man. And I'm not saying that they were the end all be all, but I think that cultures before us and societies before us had it a little bit better. You know what I mean? Like they would take this type of information and they would run with it, and they wouldn't suppress it or hide it from anyone. Because if this is how the body is, the blueprint of the body, everyone should know about it and everyone should treat it with respect. And I think
right.
that they did that. And in your findings, can you go back to those times and see if that were the case, that copper played a big role in like the ancient cultures?
Oh, absolutely. Going back to 5700 BC, they were using copper medicinally. The fascinating part about the Egyptians, their religious symbol is called an ankh. Well, the ankh is not made of gold, it's made of copper. And it was the Egyptians, for anyone who's followed my work, they know how important phlebotomies are, blood donation. Well, the Egyptians were the ones who invented that. They were the first culture that I've identified that were doing bloodletting to try to help people get healthier. And somehow they must have either intuited it. I don't know how they would have known about minerals at that point, but the bloodletting is a very effective way to lower the footprint of iron in the body and allow the body to kind of catch its breath, if you will, and restore itself to balance.
You're saying blood banks, like drawing blood?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We recommend within the root cause protocol, we recommend that men donate blood quarterly, uh, and menopausal women as well. But women who are still cycling, they should donate blood at least twice a year. But there are many women who follow the root cause protocol who do quarterly blood donations themselves. So it's people don't realize how much iron is in the food system. People don't realize how much iron is in their tissue, and they don't realize how little copper they have to regulate that iron. And that's really what we're trying to do within the protocol, is revitalize that whole mechanism so people can regain their health.
That's wild. That's like just one of those things you never even think about. It's like,
Mhm.
why would you not try that out and see if there were benefits to it?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's too easy, right?
Well, yeah, it's just one of those things that I've never thought about. And then you say it, and I'm like, wow, that makes sense. I mean, granted, I've never like looked into it, but and you have, and you've seen it, and it works, and it helps people. But let's go a little step further. I'm trying to understand like how do you consume these types of things? Like, I know, like, let's say I go to my doctor, my conventional doctor. I'm like, hey, I want to get my blood panel done. Are they going to look
Right?
for these things?
No, no. um, I had to cobble together my own. Um, I had to cobble together my own blood test based using existing markers, but I call it the full Monty iron panel. We look at 13 different markers. Most of them are minerals. We're looking at copper and zinc, and there's several iron markers. There's a magnesium in the red blood cell, but we're also looking at vitamin A and vitamin D, and we look at uric acid. And the whole goal is to get a more holistic perspective of how the body is metabolizing these minerals. And that's not the focus of mainstream medicine. They have a completely different approach. And what I've been able to do is take their blood tests and develop a way to interpret the results, looking at it through the lens of mineral metabolism. And it's been a really a fascinating area of study for me over the last few years.
I would be very curious on how that works, and like just to see it with my own two eyes, because I mean, you've done it, you've seen it, and you have the data and the results to back it up, and it just, yeah.
Sure. What I can I'll text you the link for the blood test. You pop for the blood test. It's like 275. I have no control over that, and we'll interpret your results in vivo. We'll do it on a podcast.
Oh,
And I'll walk you through your blood work. It's going to blow your mind what you're going to learn.
oh, I'm 100% for that. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, just the amount of help that could help everyone, because again, we know America is like, it's home of the free, but also home of the sick, and and it's not a lie, man. Like every year, it's that time of year. It's coming up. It's about to be winter, man, and the kids are going to be sick, and just
That's
everyone's.
right. You know it. And the part that a lot of people don't know about, or they don't want to know about, is that a lot of these changes, you were asking about the use of copper in other cultures. Copper's been in use for millennia, but about 100 years ago, with the advent of the First World War, everything flipped. Again, I don't know why. I just think there's this convergence of insanity, and there were three areas of change. Uh, the field of farming changed. The introduction of farming chemicals began about a century ago. Food processing changed, and then pharmaceuticals really began to ramp up. And I think there's compelling evidence that those three industries are in cahoots with each other. Maybe they have interlocking boards. I don't know, but there's an awful lot of they certainly support each other. But the part that people may not know is that in the world of farming, there's a chemical called Roundup. That's its stage name. Its formal name is called glyphosate, and it's a mineral chelator. Well, what's important for people to know is that glyphosate is used all over the world now, and glyphosate is a very powerful not just mineral chelator, but copper chelator. And Don Huber, who's a famous scientist at Purdue University, has been studying this for decades. But what he's discovered is that minerals are being chelated on a logarithmic scale. They're not coming out, they're not being grabbed at the same speed. So that an earthquake of 3 is very different than an earthquake of 12. Earthquake of 3 is the dishes rattle and you go about your business. Earthquake of 12, nobody survives. And so what's important to know is that this farming chemical that's ubiquitous is taking calcium and magnesium out of the soil at a 3, but it's taking copper out of the soil at a 12.
That's not
So
good.
what's that mean? That means it's pulling copper out 1,000,000,000 times faster. Now, people will say, oh, I'm not worried about glyphosate. I buy organic. Well, let me burst your bubble and know that when glyphosate was introduced in Europe in 1987, Europe was opposed to the use of glyphosate, but no one was more opposed to glyphosate than the French. They outlawed the use of glyphosate. Well, someone decided to do a study, and in 2022, they wanted to take a retrospective view and say, how did the French fare because they didn't have the use of glyphosate? And it's a very unsettling study because what you find out is that 99% of French citizens are peeing glyphosate in their urine. That means that even though they banned it, even though they outlawed it, it's in the air, it's in the rainwater, and it's in the water table now. It's everywhere. And that's not even the most toxic chemical in farming, but it's certainly the one that has the greatest affinity for copper. And so people are operating from incomplete information. They're still thinking that copper is toxic when in fact it's running the show. They're they're not aware that the farmers down the street are using chemicals that are sucking it out of their body, and there is compelling proof in the literature that when copper is deficient, the body starts to fall apart. And so the analogy that I use that seems to help people, when you take gold out of the economy, At some point, the economy is going to collapse. So we've been running on vapor for many years now, certainly since 2008. But no one understands that better than G. Edward Griffin. I'm sure somewhere in your studio there, you've got a computer or two. Well, if you take silver out of the motherboard of those computers, guess what happens? They don't work. So you got gold, you got silver. Oh, well, let's take copper out of the human being. And what happens? People spend a lot more time in their doctor's office, at the pharmacy, and in the hospital. And it's in the research. It's absolutely documented line by line in the research. And what people don't realize is that there's a Chinese wall in medical schools between the research and the classroom. And they don't teach the findings of the research in the classroom. Why? Because it kills the profit.
So I know this would be speculation, but let's say that wherever this boat's heading, let's say we keep sailing the same way, with the Roundup being sprayed, all the pesticides, because I've known some people in commodities here locally, in the middle of the United States, and I've always been curious about, I would say like, hey man, like what about like all the stuff, all the chemicals that they put in there, and he's like, man, he's like, it's not enough to hurt you, man. He's like, it's so many, it's minuscule how parts per million it is that actually go onto all the crops and what you consume. I'm like, it just doesn't sound safe at all. I mean, just he's in the business, so of course he's going to say that, just to make it to save face to me or to the public, like, hey, there's barely any on there. It has to be this way. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. We've gotten here as a country before any of this technology existed. Yes, the population has increased, but it doesn't mean that I can't go to my backyard and farm my own type of food and vegetables. But I guess, if we were to continue course,
right.
I mean, I feel like just the population is going to decrease at an alarming rate.
We're witnessing it.
Right.
It's happening. It's right in front of us.
So I guess, I'm sorry, Morley, I'm saying, like, let's say 100 years from now, I mean, you think like and I know there's probably not an answer, but like half the population type of thing.
I've never even thought about it in that sense. But families are getting smaller. People are electing they're electing not to have children, or they're not able to have children. It's absolutely, we're witnessing the very depopulation of the planet. And because it's so subtle, we don't see the magnitude of it. There are, one of the communities that I've really gotten to know is the Plain community, the Amish and the Mennonites. And for generations, they've prided themselves on really big families, 10 to 12 children. Well, now they're struggling to have 3 and 4 children. There's been a change in the demographics of the Plain community. But if you don't know that, you're not aware of it, you don't think about it. But it is absolutely happening, and people just need to wake up and smell the coffee, because it's actually taking place.
So what can people do? Okay, I mean, there's so many questions, man. We're definitely gonna have to do a 2-part. What can people do? And I know there's not an end all be all type of answer, and maybe there is, but when you talk about in ancient times or times in the past where they medicinally used copper, what does that mean? And I'm not suggesting that you're suggesting people to do that, but how do you consume copper in a safe way? Because I looked it up before, and what Google's going to say is like through cereal. Like there's no cereal that I'm going to buy that's going to have any decent amount of copper in it, or shellfish, or seeds, or you know what I'm saying? What's like a good way?
If Google and AI is your source, you're not going to win the battle.
I know. I was just.
No. I'm not teasing you. I'm teasing the audience.
Sure.
I've got a guy who's trying to convince me about something about ceruloplasmin, and he's using AI as his source. And I said, dude, come back to me with peer-reviewed literature. Don't tell me about AI. I don't want to hear it. What do people need to do? They got to get the book, and it doesn't take long to read the book. The front half of the book is what's the problem. The back half of the book is what's the solution. But that's not the only source. There are, go to the website, rcp123.org. And that website has a resources page that'll choke a horse. There's a handbook. You can access the handbook. It's about 80 pages long, and it will take you um, by the hand, teach you exactly how to stop certain nutrients that are causing problems. And maybe we can talk about that in a future conversation. But there are many supplements that people are taking today that are aggravating their health, and they think they're the bee's knees, and they're not. And so we've got to stop certain nutrients. We've got to start other nutrients. The importance of incorporating organ meats into the diet, very, very important. And we've got a whole spectrum of supplements that we recommend to people to get them on the journey. And we've broken them down into phases. Got a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, so that people can stair step their way into this process.
So I've never been big on organ meat. I don't think I've really even ever tried it. So I just
I'm
curious.
shocked. I'm shocked.
Yeah, I'm a fillet guy. I like fillet. I'm not really a ribeye
Right.
guy. I did work at a restaurant, but they were like liver and gizzards, and those are deep fried. So there's no way those are good for you. And I
Right.
didn't try those, but let's say you get some grass fed, organic, like truly organic, like liver meat, right? Like, and
Right.
I'm curious if I were to eat that, you cook it medium or whatever, I would feel or see results, or is it something that takes time and you consistently eating it over a period of time?
Well, let me just point out that your ancestors ate organ meats and threw the muscle meats to the dogs. But we're so sophisticated now, we eat muscle meats and we use organ meats to feed our dogs. That's how much society has changed. A complete reversal of what our ancestors would have done. Would you feel better? Very likely. But what we've discovered is that um, the body, the availability of copper has changed because of glyphosate. And that's why I developed my own copper supplement called Recuperate so that people can make sure that they get the copper that they need. It's as much as we want to believe that it's in the soil, it's disappearing. And I'm a huge proponent of organ meats. I don't want people to misunderstand that. But we're not getting the access, the level that is required in order to run our body.
And then,
Just not happen. And for years, we were promoting organ meats on the root cause protocol. It has only been in the recent past that I developed that supplement, so that just to make sure that people got their copper.
yeah, and we're coming up to the top of the hour, and we'll probably end it here in a little bit, or here shortly. Sorry, but I think you're right. Whenever you see an alarming statistic like in France that you talk about, and it's still within 90% over 90% of people, like that's a scary thought. And if you
No,
if you
it
weren't
is.
if you weren't doing this type of research, it almost makes me wonder. It's just one of those things that would have got pushed aside. No one would have ever known, and no one would have put, and someone eventually would have put two and two together. That's what I find in this
Right.
realm is that there's so many people that someone's eventually going to find it. But I'm very thankful, Morley, for you for finding that, man. And I love to reference, and I know you got references in the book, and people, and I bought your book. I'm going to have it up here on my table here in a couple days. I suggest all the people do the same thing, because you're not just talking out of your ass, man. You've done the research, you've backed it up with scientific method and all these
Right.
types of things. So I just want to reiterate that to people. And again, this is fascinating stuff, man. It's just copper. I never knew it. You're not taught it in school, in the
No.
public education. It's like, I have so much now that I have to turn and look to, and your book's going to be a great asset for me to do that. And I'm 35, man. I'm 35. Imagine someone who's 55 or 60 hearing this information.
Absolutely. And the thing is, what people need to do is the world changed in 2020. We don't have to get into the politics of it or anything like that. But we know what we learned during that period is that there's more to the story. And what I'm encouraging people to do as they begin to embrace the subject matter is think about the fact that maybe there's more to the story about what nutrients we need in order to stay healthy. Maybe we haven't been given the full spectrum of knowledge. And I didn't know any of this. This has been a late in life. I was in my 50s when I started this journey, and it's been an absolute revelation to realize that the knowledge is there, the information is there. You gotta ask the right questions at the right time. You got to use the right words. I'm a real good um, Google researcher now because I know what the code words are to open up the treasure trove, and a lot of people don't know that. And again, I'm happy to teach people that. That's not the point. The issue is the information's out there. The information is not being taught. That's what people need to know. It's simply not being taught, and it's certainly not being discussed on the internet. What's on the internet is pablum. People don't realize that they're being trained by the most basic um, pedestrian information that's available. And what I've done is taken people uptown, got them into the peer-reviewed research so they can see for themselves. I've got on that resources page I talked about, there's 81 posts on iron toxicity. And I introduce people to the reality of iron and how copper is critical for its regulation. And embedded in every one of those 81 articles is a half a dozen peer-reviewed articles so people can go even deeper if they want to.
I wonder. I'm curious. Like, I know copper is in the liver, and I'm almost wondering. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is just a question. Do you think that could be part of the reason why that the liver regenerates itself?
Great question. The liver, I don't know that the liver regenerates itself. You can do without 6/7 of your liver. The only organ that I know for a fact that regenerates itself is the spleen. But I don't know if it's because both of those organs are very copper rich. But I don't know whether that regenerative capacity is a function of copper or whether it's just the inherent nature of the organ.
Sure, that makes sense.
Great question. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just didn't. Yeah, I don't know if copper is in every organ in the body. I don't know that.
It is.
It is
Oh, it
okay.
is.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Again, every organ has mitochondria. You can't you can't generate energy without a mitochondria, and you can't generate that function without copper in the center of the mitochondria.
Okay. Well, yeah, man, we're like right at an hour. Morley, I appreciate your time, man. It's some fascinating stuff, and I can't wait to help promote just this knowledge that you have. It's a wealth of knowledge, man. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you again and having more conversation because you have a lot of knowledge that needs to be helped have being spread. So,
And I will send you that link for the blood test. I think you will find it fascinating, and I think your listeners and followers will be equally intrigued. I do that with many of the podcast hosts that I've worked with. I've been on about 90 different platforms, 300 videos out there. There's no shortage of blah blah blah, but I'm very excited about this one just because of the focus is to get people to the Red Pill Expo in November, and looking forward to having a chance to meet people and share this information directly with them.
absolutely, man. I told my wife tonight, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it just because it's very chaotic for us, like I told you earlier.
Sure.
In a good way, in a good way, but it almost sounds like, I should try and make it out there for at least one day. I think that'd be a really fun time.
That'd be great. Would love to meet you face to face, press the flesh, and I don't know. I've not been to a Red Pill event, but I'm told that it's quite the experience. So I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, man. Well, is there anything else that you want to say before you leave? Any plugs or anywhere? Where can we find your book, man? I know probably on Amazon, but it's probably better to buy it from your website.
Well, Amazon is really principally where I sell it. So that's been very good. I actually have a mainstream publisher who's going to pick up the distribution rights, and in the new year we're going to have the second edition. So very excited about that. And people who are interested in reaching out, my email address is my first and last name, Morley Robbins at gmail.com. And for those brave few that want to call me, my phone number is 847-922-8061. And I've been giving out my contact information for about 10 years now, and I really cherish the interaction I have with with the public. So I look forward to the exchange.
It's awesome. Yeah, anyone who's brave, man, it's you in that regard to just throw your number out there like that.
Absolutely.
I'll be curious, man.
Well,
If you
people that need to find out the truth,
absolutely,
they want to talk to the guy who knows. So I'm happy to share that.
I'd be curious if you make it to the Joe Rogan podcast, if you'd still give your number out at the end.
You want to bet on
that? Well, whatever it happens, man, we'll have to make a bet.
Joe Rogan's in my sights. I hope I have that opportunity, and we'll see what happens when I do give out my number.
Rock on, man. Well, I appreciate you, Morley. Thanks for joining Talk Junkies, man. I look forward to chatting with you again.
Very good. You take care.
You as well.
Thanks so much.